Okay. Welcome to the Political Paradigm Shift podcast, episode number 9. So today we are down two people that are typically here. So Heather's here and Heather's not here. It's her birthday. And Chuck is going to be late, supposedly. But we do have Afra returning. And as always, we have Art. So today we're going to be talking about authoritarianism in the United States and tyranny. And so to start us off, Afra is going to do a little historical rundown of authoritarianism. And so I'm going to hand it off to you, Afra, and we'll go from there.
All right. Hi, everybody, and happy birthday, Heather. I miss you. I wish that you were here. Okay, so this is basically common knowledge, but you know that the word tyranny is very old, and it comes from the Greek. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. Art, if you would like to, you do that at any time. And the word was also in use in Latin, tyrannus. So the original Greek referred to, as we we were often taught in school, it referred to just a king. Right? A king of usually a smaller, like a city area or something. However, right from the beginning, it was associated with populism, because what these kings would do, they'd be kind of these martial warrior kings, and they would come in as a strong man and kind of allay the fears and the anger that the people would have with the aristocracy or the priests or whoever was in control. So what happens kind of immediately, and I think this is relevant to the United States, is first of all this attachment with populism and this idea of a king or an autocrat or a tyrant as being outside of politics, something that is apolitical, bigger than politics, that kind of stands in as an avatar for the common people, because ironically or paradoxically, because they're not elected by the people, they can stand as a representative for the body politic. And that's something that you see with the Stuart kings in England, with the Hanoverians in particular, because they held themselves up as being these kind of constitutional monarchs that were, by virtue of not being elected, able to represent the people in a way that people who are running every few years for their seat in parliament or whatever it is had to play the political game, right? They had to play games, and so they spoke to the popular furor, whatever that might be, the popular desires, the popular need, all while being these kind of sort of untouchable people who are above the law, but also very representative of a kind of, with the Hanoverians and with the Stuarts in particular. So if you're not familiar with this, the Stuarts were 17th century, and England and Britain, and the Hanoverians were the 18th century, the Georges, as we say. So bringing us right up to George III, there was, because they weren't elected, they ruled, and because they ruled over republics, they ruled by a sort of consent that was different than consent that existed because of voting. It was an implied consent in a Lockean terms. And so it was understood that because they weren't overthrown, let's say in a sort of empirical way, they're not being overthrown and they stand for the people, therefore they must be governing by a sort of implied consent. So the connection between the autocrat and the popular has always been with us. And George III, who would, let's say, began in a way the conversation in America about what tyranny is, what autocracy is, and what monarchy is, and whether those things were inextricable from one another. It began with George III, who would have been a person who saw himself as actually the anti-tyrant, right? But we see him in the United States now as the quintessential tyrant, the one, and part of that is because of the way that George III considered the colonies, the American colonies, these kind of subordinate children to a parent. The rhetoric in England at the time was all about parents with insubordinate children and how they needed to be punished and kept in line. But when we think about George III, we see him in a very different way than his, British, in the British Isles, his British contemporaries might have seen him. Not so much as an autocrat, although he did always demand loyalty, but as someone who was above all of that, in a way. So what I thought would be an interesting way to talk about this, at least to begin, is the relationship between autocracy and populism. Because what populism says is, we have these problems, we want them solved, but we want to go outside the conventional system, conventional measures in order to solve them, and we want to sort of put all of our hopes. It's very rare to see a populism that we ask a body, like Congress or something, to serve those needs. Populism is invested in kind of the figure of a single person, typically a man. So I thought that might be a good way to start. I don't know if you have any ideas about that, or if you want to go in a different direction, but that's my opening piece.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So you said that you touched on the fact that monarchy and autocracy were inextricably intertwined, right? Do you think that's true?
Do I think that's true? Yes, I said it, so I
right.
do.
Okay. Well, just because, right? Go ahead.
Just to go back to Latin really quick. So tyranny or tyrannus was a concept of illegitimate rule, where you could have an autocrat who was both a sovereign, like an absolute power, but also one that was inherently illegitimate, which was different from a dominatus, which was like a sovereign or a ruler, but one that basically had some kind of legitimacy. So when we say it, there's kind of this implied sentiment that any ruler or monarch or someone of this type of unified command would be inherently illegitimate. But that's just if you want to get back to the semantic origin of it.
I think that even in the Greek conception, there is a hint of illegitimacy in the king or tyrant. And what you see is, plays anywhere from Oedipus all the way through, particularly in Athens, right? The idea of a king is kind of sort of intolerable. So if, we're all familiar with the story of Oedipus, but a lot of us just kind of know the sex stuff. So, but what's really an issue in that, before Freud, is the idea that Oedipus comes out just like Julius Caesar did, and just like Charles II and the Hanoverians, and said, I weep for my people, I love them, everything that hurts them hurts me double, because I feel their pain and I feel my struggle, right? But what that book ends up being, what that play ends up being about, is the fact that if you have an autocratic ruler, you are at the mercy of whatever happens to him. So if it turns out that he's had sex with his mother and killed his father and goes mad and stabs out his own eyes, the people are in some trouble, because they have, so this is coming like not just from 5th century Athens, but this, even in the Greek conception of the tyrant or of the king, is always this concern that there is an illegitimacy there, or that it is an imperfect system. And of course, if you are a group of local nobles who get pushed out by a warrior king, you're going to consider that to be illegitimate as well. But by the time it gets to the Roman period, the Romans kicked out their kings very, very early on and had really no interest in getting another one. So by the time it gets to them, the idea of a tyrant is absolutely illegitimate, because it's not a rule by the people. And not only that, but anybody who inherits from the tyrant, Julius Caesar, Augustus, Tiberius, whoever, is thereby also illegitimate, from the root.
And I think it's an interesting kind of a comparison to our times, where we have this bastardized version of conservatism, which took the founding ideas that there is like legitimate authority that can be derived from government, from the consent of the people, and that can then exercise power on their behalf, to now we have this almost reflexive sense that any centralized authority is inherently illegitimate, even if it has the consent of the governed, to the point where if the government comes out and says, hey, there's this terrible pandemic, the disease is running rampant, please wear a mask. And people will, out of principle, not wear a mask and endanger themselves, because the idea of any kind of authority figure telling you to do anything, even if it's manifestly in your own interests, is rejected reflexively. And it's just this weird, like, diametric departure from the kind of the ancient way of viewing like legitimate authority and its value, to this point where now any authority is illegitimate. So this is when Americans talk about tyranny in this day and age, there's an interesting subtext to it that's just, miles apart from where it started.
But I wouldn't say that's the only reason. I would say that the reflexive response is also to the fact that it's Democrats that are making this an issue, that are
Who's
telling
doing
them
it
to do.
matters.
To an extent, yes. There's, certainly a deep degree of hypocrisy in there, but I guess there's this expectation that that their team won't tell them to do as much, and they might be a little bit more begrudgingly go along with it, even if they didn't like it. But it's hard to say. I mean, even if Trump were to come out and
if Trump came out and said wear a mask, most Republicans would wear a mask. I mean, right? His stance against it, or his sort of flip-flopping around it, is one of the reasons why.
I think Trump read the room, and he, being one that harnesses in most cases, he understands where the mindset of his people is, and he tries to be ahead of it. And he does that very well. And I think that he understood that he didn't want to wear a mask, and that meant that probably his followers didn't want to wear a mask, because he doesn't like being told what to do. They don't like being told what to do. It was kind of the natural flow for it. I mean, in theory, yes, there's all kinds of stuff that he could probably get people to do that would be against their interests. I think there'd still be some degree of pushback to it, but,
To a
In
lesser
this case,
degree.
yeah,
I'm
in this
it's part of
case, I think, sorry, Nick, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
I think that both, you're both correct. There will always be some who will not do it, and I think that the reason for that Henry Garreau article that I sent you, and he talks about this in a number of different places, is that there's a conception of freedom, agency, personal liberty in the U.S. now that really is, and probably other places as well, that's very much just connected to the ability to do whatever you want, own whatever you want, and not have to think about any kind of civic duty. It's kind of anathema to the whole concept of doing things as a community. And Garreau blames that on markets, late stage capitalism and consumerism and things like that. But there is a sense that I don't have to do anything that I am told to do, even if it's for my good or for other people's good. And Trump knows that, and he taps right into that, because he's the embodiment of that idea, right? Doing whatever you want, whenever you want, without consequences. And it's the consequences for actions that are unfair, not necessarily the behavior. And what he says also, which I think is really important, talking about autocracy and tyranny, is that when democracy itself becomes, as he calls it, a fiction or a joke or a non-serious thing or something that we don't believe works, like voting doesn't work, our politicians don't work for us, they're all just out for themselves. When people believe that democracy doesn't work and is a fiction, they have no reason to listen to Gretchen Whitmer. Right? And they have no reason to listen to, or I have no reason to listen to Trump, or you might have no reason to listen to Cuomo, because you would only be choosing to do that because it's a brand you've decided you have loyalty to. And if you don't have loyalty to that brand, then your sense of ultimate personal unfettered freedom is going to take over. And what he says comes after that is just this sort of absolute callous, heartless cruelty. And I feel like I'm seeing, and he wrote this in 2011, I'm seeing this play out now with COVID, right? I don't care, only 1% of people will die. Well, how many millions of people is that? Like, that's a lot of people, right? But it's this callous cruelty, because what we're loyal to is not an idea, it's not a country, it's a brand. It's a political brand, or it's an idea of just being absolutely free to do whatever we want. And if we do make a choice to align with one set of rules or another, it's just like going to the store and deciding which hair dryer you're going to buy and then sticking with that.
But that's sort of a new phenomenon in the United States, right? It wasn't always like that. Why do you think it's like that now? Why do you think we've devolved into this tribalistic?
Well, what specifically do you mean?
Me?
Well, him. You know, you're saying that this is new, but like, what when you say this is new, what specifically?
What he says is a kind of exercise of individual freedom that is more akin to selecting, choosing merchandise, or to consumerism, to your own personal identity based on, like, I wear Harley Davidson t-shirts, or I wear, something else, and people are very committed to that. It's not that it's not real, and it's not that it's not equally as passionate, but what they're committed to is their, what we call tribes, or I think brand is what Guru would call it, rather than actually solving problems, right? What is the guiding impulse? It's the brand, your personal brand, your personal identity as understood through a lot of choices that you make that are consumerist. And when that extends into the political sphere, you're dealing with people who won't put on a mask because Gretchen Whitmer told them to. Now, I don't know how new that is, but I do know that.
Well, I mean, take the example of 9/11, right, and the Bush administration. So when the towers were attacked, I think we had, like, Bush ended up having like a 90% approval rating. There was this big unification throughout the country. It was like unprecedented. And then when Bush left office, he had a 20% approval rating because everything was a disaster, etc. It doesn't seem like it can shift like that anymore. It doesn't seem like Trump, regardless of what he does, is going to fall below that 35% of approval. And it's this reflexive response that I feel like is more powerful than it's ever been in American life, that prevents people from doing things that are pretty common sense and moral, right? Like wearing masks, etc. And I just feel like that's the degree of tribalism is a new phenomenon.
Well, we're trying to figure out how that works, and I'm not committed to these, this heuristic, but it does seem like, brand loyalty and a market-based conception of personal freedom is a useful way to understand at least part of this. And we're talking about, all the podcasts have been talking about tribalism in one sense or another, and why. We know that there is media on both sides, but what is the impulse? The impulse is what advertising and marketing has been trying to do to people since the 1950s in terms of brand loyalty, and it's super, super pervasive, I think.
Well, let's talk about brand loyalty and a version of this that we have had for a while, and you'll be more familiar with it when I mention it. So the common libertarian argument for not needing government intervention in, let's say, a free market would be, well, you don't need to require that stores sell to everybody because stores want to make money. So why would they not want to make money off of, let's say, Black customers? Why would people not want to sell houses to Black customers if they could make money? Why would they not want to sell shoes? Why would you not want to have a counter where you could go up and get some food? And in the abstract, sure, everybody likes money, but in the more day-to-day social aspect of it, or if you want to talk about the brand loyalty to whiteness kind of aspect, you have social ostracization that you could face were you to sell to people that your community doesn't want you to sell to. So you are incentivized, and people were for a long time in this country, to turn away money and avoid getting cash which would be in your interest to build your customer base because it would annoy or offend people in your social circle. What that means is that while you could make a little bit of money there, you could be cut off from access to being seen as a ranking member of society. It could hurt your mate selection. It could hurt your ability to just move throughout your own community. And it wouldn't actually pencil out. You would lose far more than you would gain when you have strong tribal barriers against engaging in certain types of commerce. So this is sort of an extension of that. This has just made its way into our broader politics, where people are now incentivized to pick this version of reality, whichever version is more useful to your side, or whichever one's just more desirable, and we decide to see things a certain way. And like you said, you're going to the store and you're picking out what version of hairdryer you want. As far as like a hairdryer, that might not matter. As far as, you know, maybe like what kind of music you listen to, what kind of clothes you wear, that's going to set a lot of your social dynamic. People will judge you in a certain way based off of who you are, who you associate with, what you listen to, how you dress, what kind of car you drive, what kind of boat, if any, you fly your Trump or Biden flag from, which is of course a joke because people tend to only fly Trump flags from it. I mean, there's weird social markers people can put out there to kind of define themselves that before we didn't really used to do in that sphere. We did it in other ways. And as that kind of went away, we went to this kind of more of a, there's never been an American uniculture, but we kind of pretended that there was for like 50 years, where there was this unified, like kind of a boomer-ish, you know, Americana that we just pretended was normal America. But when you have reality that's in a certain universal kind of set, that constrains you. Like you actually are expected to exist in that reality. So what Trump did, which has been happening for a while, but he just grasped upon it a little more firmly, is decided to say, you know what, I just reject your reality and I substitute it with my own. So this is now reality. I'm now for saving the post office, even though I just said a while ago, I'm trying to defund it so I can destroy it. And that rejection of reality in favor of a new reality where people just select that reality, pretend it's real. If you get enough people behind that, that becomes reality in a practical sense as far as your day-to-day existence. It doesn't necessarily mean that COVID won't kill you, but it means that if you don't wear a mask, people see you as a valued member of that society. Statistically speaking, you have more to gain from that than you do the odds of dying from COVID. So it becomes this weird kind of a death cult gamble where you're like, well, you know, we only have to sacrifice a couple of people to the volcano god every year. Probably won't be me. So I'm going to back the volcano god and everyone's going to like me. I'm going to have a great place in society and my odds of dying are pretty low. So it's this weird calculation. It's always existed in different form in human society that we're just seeing a really blatant version of right now because social media makes it really obvious when we do things that are contrary to reality.
Yeah, and I think the flags are a perfect illustration of that, because what Trump is, or pretty much all he is a marketer. He's a brand. He's always been a brand. And there are no flags. Nobody has flags. There are no Obama flags. You know, maybe you get a button, maybe a t-shirt, a little sign to wave at the rally. He's got like 20-foot flags. People are like plastered on their house, you know, with his name on it. Trump everything. Everywhere you go, there are little pop-up stores with Trump merchandise and everything like that. It has become like the Nike, you know, of politics. And you can show your loyalty, your brand loyalty to Trump in a way that you still can't do with any other politician. So it's satisfying that whole desire to demonstrate your identity and your freedom to make commercial, you know, consumerist choices in your politics. And there's this total crossover. And there's also a crossover, of course, you know, between like this sort of religious worldview and Trump, because he's the savior, right? And he's been sent by God and he's this flawed vessel, but we also love him. And he's so, you know, he's doing God's work and things like that. So people who are primed for that kind of, I don't want to say cult worship, but even just to follow, you know, to follow a religious leader around can also transfer those same, you know, well-exercised human impulses towards Trump. And
Yeah.
and so I think, you know, that you brought up the flags, and I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of the article that I was referencing before.
Well, and I'll take it a step further and talk about, you know, that type of branding. So Chairman Mao, back when he got started, you know, especially like into the 60s, you probably remember the term, the Little Red Book. Then you remember probably Mao's like kind of, you know, like grayish or, you know, like bluish, like weird button up kind of thing. So that was called Mao Ifu, which is just like Mao clothing. There was a period in China where like everybody wore that. Like it was just practically like the uniform of the people. You'd have your little Mao pin, you'd have your little red book with his little picture on it. And when you have a cult of personality, authoritarian style, it is about the brand. It's about you identifying with the brand. It's you wearing the red hat and putting the Trump flag up, or you carrying your little red book, your little, art of the deal or what have you, but whatever you need to do to signal that, hey, I am part of the crew, guys, and I'm going to say the right things. I'm going to display the right, not just the right attitudes, but the right physical changes, the right, let's call it virtue signaling, but you're showing that you're part of the in-group, that any modern, successful, authoritarian cult of personality dictator is going to try to do. And that is build this kind of personal brand representation that the people display, not just out of love, but at a certain point, you don't want to be rejected or ostracized within your community. So you do feel a bit compelled to mention or show some kind of support, even if it's a sticker on your car or a flag on your boat or whatever. It's a nice, easy way to show that those other people you might want to do business with or you might want to associate with, that you're part of the in-crew. And it has a really, humans are very valuable in terms of our social dynamics, and we like to have that social capital. So if you can find a way to kind of clout build within your own society easily, having a cult of personality dictator where it's a pyramid scheme where he's up top, but as you work your way up, there's benefits for you. It kind of builds an engine that people want to plug into.
Yeah, I think just going to say this, it's about that brand loyalty. It's about that cult of personality. It's about that person. It's about fitting in. But what it is decidedly not about, this is the next section thing that I want to talk about, is the system working or even surviving. It is not about that. It's actually antithetical to the underpinnings of whether it's the checks and balances or the Congress or the states' rights or anything like that. It's not about any of that. And particularly if that gets in the way. And that's where this sort of cult of personality begins to turn into an autocracy, which people, or at least a percentage of people, will consent to.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this is, again, similar to that cult of personality thing, getting people to buy into like that brand loyalty. I think that, I was going to take this in a totally different direction. So before I do that, let's loop back into your thing, because I have this like Chairman Mao thing where I was just going to go down a total rabbit hole.
I want to hear about Chairman Mao, but I feel like we're squeezing Nick out of here.
I know. Nick, go ahead, because I'm just going to derail this.
The only thing that I wanted to say is there's sort of a version of this on the left too, right? There's what was the thing that happened somewhat recently with Goya? So stuff happens where, what was the controversy where the left starts protesting various products and uses their buying power to sort of.
I think the CEO he supports Trump, right?
You got that one backwards. So this guy who's the CEO of Goya.
Support for Trump made people on the left want to boycott, and some of them did, an entire product, right? That was their sort of response.
Yeah, this is on the White House lawn for some like COVID-19 thing where this like Goya like CEO like pledges like this crazy like campaign level speech for something that had nothing to do with the Trump campaign or Trump or anything. It was supposed to be like COVID. So it was weirdly inappropriate and political, and he got some political pushback for it.
Oh, okay. But that's just like making, that's just regular people making a choice to boycott a brand or not boycott a brand. And I don't think, and I could be wrong here, that it really has anything to do with their identity, right? Like, to be making that choice is an intellectual choice or it's a political choice. It's not like, and I want me not buying Goya to define me in some way so that I could fit in with this particular group. And I think, in that case, you didn't have a person who was exploiting that market concept of identity and freedom in that same way. But you always have this sort of pushback from the right, who's like, they're always like, oh, you boycott things. That's so you're silencing people by boycotting. But that's just sort of normal, it's normal civic behavior, I think. I didn't boycott Goya mainly because I have a cabinet full of it, and it would take 3 years to stop using it anyway, which I still do.
Well, let me I'll do my segue really quick on Mao, just so we can keep going. But because we're talking about the buy-in with the brand loyalty and all that. So you never have a period where you just have the cult of personality. There's always enemies and threats. So there was one point where Mao came out with the five, what was it? The five category. It's like the five black categories or something. But you had right wingers, landlords, like wealthy farmers, which was like aristocrats, counter-revolutionaries who were trying to bring back the Kuomintang, and bad influencers who were like, the criminal element, basically. So this is like stuff that figures prominently in the kind of the lore of like, I'm here fighting for the people, but you have to look out in the midst, because hiding in the midst, it could be your neighbor, it could be your relatives, it could be anybody. You could have some element out there that we need to know about because they're trying to undo the revolution. And like this weird obsession Trump has with his enemies, any cult of personality authoritarian will have the exact same obsession with enemies. They'll always define them. And now we've got college professors, we've got Hollywood, we've got, you name it, the CNN and the fake news media. There will always be a bullet point list of enemies that these guys have to harp upon to keep it focused in their own supporters' mind that it's not just that I'm good, but they're bad. And they're trying to take all this stuff away from you. Antifa's out there, and by God, we need to do something about this. There's always going to be that push of not just my policies are good and are going to help you, but and these people are bad and are going to harm you. Like, it's always the carrot and the stick with the authoritarians.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't think there's any justification for some of that? Some of that resentment from the right for those different categories of people, college professors, Hollywood, stuff like that?
Yeah, none of this would work if there wasn't some base of resentment. And, that's why I started with this very sort of early history, because even at that point, there has to be some form of consent. The tyrant, that Aristotle said, like, the tyrant rules over the unwilling. But I think that's simplistic Aristotle, try harder, because there's always going to be just enough people who call for it, right? So Julius Caesar was called a tyrant, but he was called a tyrant and understood as a tyrant by the Senate. He was understood as a tyrant by the people who had the power to write and be published and remember. But what we also know is that Julius Caesar was very much beloved by the rabble in the streets, right? They loved him. And that is because they had a reason to. They had a reason to feel that way. They were overtaxed, or they were hungry, or they weren't being taken care of, or the city was filthy, and somebody comes in and says, I feel your pain, and I'm speaking directly to you, and I don't care about all of these, big shots. But the problem with something like that is it means that it relies on undermining the system that he goes, just like Trump does, just like they all have done. They go right for, initially they go right for the nobles, right? They go right for the Congress, and they go right for the Senate. King John, or whoever it was, when they did the, what's it called, the Magna Carta, right? The Magna Carta was a deal that was finally struck with the nobility. The regular people didn't care about it, because the people who were upset at the way that the king was behaving were not the regular people, they were the nobles. So repeatedly throughout history, there's going to be a justification for a lot of people getting angry, and those people placing all of their hopes in a single man, because it's not natural for us to look at the Congress and say, do something for us, you 400, 500 people, right? With all these different people in government. It's natural to look to a single sort of savior person and invest all of our hopes in that person. So yeah, there's always going to be a justification. Is it justification for Trump support? The problem is that support comes at the expense of the institutions that prevent you from going into.
I'm not saying.
And before we welcome Chuck,
one more thing, right? And I think that this slides really in nicely to the whole idea of the unitary executive and what that actually means. I think we need to talk about, if we're going to talk about tyranny or the potential for tyranny in the United States, we need to talk about executive power as it is before 2016, and where these theories of the unitary executive are going, which is why I put that on your reading list.
Absolutely. And just really quickly, and welcome, Chuck. Thank you for joining us. Just
appreciate it.
just
Going on,
really
buddy?
quickly. So when we talk about having justification to feel resentment, I mean, that's a very broad social term that could apply to anyone from like my in-laws to like, my neighbor. So of course, humans are always going to have reason to disagree with each other. And when the founders set up our form of divided government with separation of powers and all that, it was with the understanding that people did not agree on stuff and had reason to have competing interests that needed to be sorted. So at a real basic level, yeah, no kidding. Like everybody has reason to resent each other, but that's not what we're talking about. And, even in issues of like the Whiskey Rebellion, where, George Washington went and put that down. And it's not because he was a tyrant. He was a duly elected representative of the people who had to sort out a problem that some people did not want sorted peacefully. So yes, there's going to be issues that come up where people have different interests. They want represented differently. We vote on things. Some people win, some people lose. But what we lack in an authoritarian system like what we have now under a kind of a Trumpist character is this idea of forbearance, where you understand you're not going to win every fight, but not every fight is life-threatening, and you value the system and its operation more than any individual fight. When you have an authoritarian, there's only one fight, and that's them clinging to power one more day. So there is no part of the system that's worth more than their own power, which is a rejection of the last 200 plus years of our history, where we value the system itself more than any individual person. So with authoritarianism, there's always someone in authority who, by design, must resist the operation of a democratic system that could resist their power, because that rejection of their power, that's everything to them. That's the only thing to them. Whereas in the past, sure, of course we had differences. We all had different interests. We had different goals. We had different visions of how to make the world better, but we would sort through them in a way that was mutually compatible with all of society, and we just kept plodding along as best we could. Authoritarianism of this nature is a rejection of that belief that tomorrow matters if I don't win.
Right, but that happens on the left too, is my point. And I feel like you're just applying this to the Trump supporters and not to progressives or far-leaning left people. I mean,
because it doesn't. I mean, it's a false equivalency.
It's a false equivalency to the degree that it is with the MAGA people. I mean
that there's no Trump on the left. There's no equivalency. Like there are elements on the left that in theory could be motivated to that level. And you could look again to communist China. It's not communist right now, but just in the past when it was, where you could mobilize people under those banners to go in that direction. But it just doesn't exist in this country right now.
I could definitely see the left empowering a president with authoritarian powers if he was able to do what they wanted him to do. If he could implement Medicare for all, if he could do stuff like that, they would certainly support him circumventing Congress.
No. And under President AOC, you'll feel the firm boot of the leftist justice upon your neck. But those days aren't here yet.
But my point is, let's not dismiss it as being this only right-wing phenomenon. I think
I'm just saying it is right now. I mean, you're talking about potential versus actuality.
What's that?
You're talking about potential versus actuality.
Yes. So the situation right now is the way that I think, the idea of the unitary executive is not new, and the cult of personality is not new, and these impulses to invest all of the power to cut the red tape or drain the swamp, right? So that all of the power goes to one guy, and he's our guy, and we know he's going to do the thing that we want. Right now, that guy is Trump. So a lot of this we're talking about him, but I've been talking about 4,000 years of it. It's a lot of stuff.
I think Trump has authoritarian. Yeah, I think Trump has authoritarian tendencies too, and I think that he definitely wants that sort of power, and you would take it in like 2 seconds. But there's a good argument that he hasn't done anything that's beyond what Obama did or what George W. Bush did in terms of executive orders, in terms of usurping Congress and going above and beyond what his powers are, right? He's just a lot of talk.
Right? Well, so far, nobody beats George W. Bush. I mean,
that's probably true, but Obama did some pretty intense stuff too.
He certainly didn't roll it back when he had an opportunity to.
Did not. Andy said he was going to. So Chuck, I want to get you in here because what is this guy saying? I want to get you in.
I'm in here.
So, if you want to jump into the conversation, you're welcome to. We're talking about authoritarianism and tyranny in the United States. We've kind of touched on this in the past on other various topics. I don't know if there's anything that you want to sort of say on the topic.
I'll just kind of talk based upon what I've heard you guys talk about to this point. It just seems to me like every succeeding presidential administration during really my lifetime has advanced the power of the executive just a little more, just a little more, just a little more, just a little more. And there has not been a single administration that has turned it back. And you can't reasonably expect the guy who's in charge right now to want to diminish their power, their authority. No, hell no. You want as much as you, while you're in there. Now, yeah, when you're out of there, yeah, then you talk about reining in the power of the executive. But yeah, it's very, no one's going to do it while they're in office. Again, I had said this before. I had hoped that Trump's have prompted a lot of people on the left to realize, it's probably a good idea if we make sure that whoever's president can have less power. That way, the next time someone truly noxious is elected, it won't matter as much. They will not be able to do as much harm as I think they're going to do. Unfortunately, the exact opposite has happened because, apparently the left is knows that at some point they're going to win back the White House. And at that point, they're going to do what Trump is doing now in terms of making the executive far and away the most powerful branch of government. It's not supposed to be like that. We were supposed to have three sets of parts of government that were checks and balances on each other. And for many years, during most of the 19th century, the presidency was inconsequential. The power rested in Congress. The great movement forward in the 19th century, the first half of the 19th century anyway, was Congress. The great compromises, they were done in Congress. The president was almost an afterthought. But again, as we've gone along in history, it is the nature of power sometimes to consolidate. And it's a lot easier to consolidate with one person and one administration than 535 different people and their various tentacles. So yeah, it's something we have to check on at all times. Unfortunately, I think Congress is mostly to blame for that. I think they have very deliberately punted the ball on a lot of their authority. They have given it to the executive branch, not just the president, but the president's appointees, federal agencies and whatnot. Congress has been a willing participant in this shift of power. And I haven't seen a willingness from Congress to reassert itself. We're supposed to have big arguments and big fights over major issues. The last major fight we had in Congress was over ACA. Before that, you might have had to go back to the damn Civil Rights Act to find a good, spirited congressional debate about a major issue. Now we just want the president to handle it. Even if you don't like the guy, it's someone who's going to make a decision very quickly, and we're an instant do it for me yesterday society. So anyway, Congress has as much to blame for anybody as this happening. And unfortunately, again, I've said this before, I don't like the direction we're headed. It's not getting any better in terms of checking the power of the executive branch. And I don't know what it's going to take to have an effective system of checks and balances again. I don't know.
I actually wanted to ask you a question, Afra, and I apologize if I mischaracterized what you said. But you said that in order to implement any sort of populist agenda in the United States as like a president, that you would have to go outside the parameters of what our constitutional system allows, right? So I just wanted you to kind of expand on that. And also, you don't think that there's a way of having a populist president and doing it within those parameters?
In terms of feelings rather than logic or argument, no, I don't. I don't think that there is a way to do that without, having all of this power and in one person. And here's the thing. Okay, so everybody who's elected to Congress is elected in many cases as really, really sort of tiny districts, right? And they're answerable to the people in that district. And you're not going to have, you might have an upswell of people who say, let's say, we want universal health care, but they're not all going to agree, you know, all across the United States or even in large numbers about exactly how that should happen. They're going to disagree. So the idea of populism is, I think, like what Chuck said, like, I want it and I want it yesterday. I want it now. And the easiest way to get things done immediately is to put all of that power into the hands of a single person and allow them to have it. And then you don't have to deal with the fact that, all right, so we've got a Democrat in District 2 who's an AOC progressive, but the Democrat in District 1 is dealing with people who want, above all, just to make sure their taxes don't go up and, you know, and that their police are funded. But they're both Democratic districts, right? So you're dealing with hundreds of people who have maybe even if from the same party or have different views of things, and what the people who are populist, traditionally what's happened is that the first ones that the populist leader will go after are the ones who are directly in his way of achieving more power, whether that's, you know, altruistically to serve the people who have elected him, or whether that's because he wants to consolidate power and make himself richer or something like that. But I don't think that a populist agenda can get through using our very, very important constitutional norms and separation of powers.
Okay, good answer. That was a really good answer. Anybody else want to expand on that?
One of the greatest things, music to this libertarian's ears, is when somebody says, well, according to the Constitution, we can't do this. Yes, I fucking love hearing that. I love the assurance, occasionally, don't get it very often these days, but I love the assurance that people do still recognize the primacy of the Constitution and the fact that it is primarily a limiting document. Congress shall make no law. Congress shall not. Government shall not. It goes through great pains to shackle the power of this entity that ultimately is other than the constitutional protections, we have very limited ways of controlling it. So I get a damn hard on whenever I hear somebody talking about the Constitution in terms of its limiting power. We all have different things that turn us on. Just,
right, hey, no kink shaming here.
Arnold let me up on this.
Absolutely, yo, no kink shaming.
You to say that.
Yeah.
Nice job.
But no, I love that, and I love even more that people still, and I hope this is always the case, still recognize that fact that we have a wonderful old document that is designed to make kings and queens impossible. And I hope it always remains that way.
It sounds like we're associating populism with authoritarianism, right?
That's what I said from the beginning. It's
right.
Always been associated. They're inextricable.
Okay, so would you consider people like AOC and Bernie Sanders to be dangerous to our constitutional system?
Not in their present positions, where one is a senator and the other one is
as a president.
No, not if things, you know, unless they get more. I'm wondering, like as Chuck said, every president has pushed the limits a little bit more, and they certainly haven't rolled anything back, you know, at least since the early 1970s. So, I mean, why can't one of these motherfuckers on his way out of office just be like, yeah, we're gonna roll this back a little bit? Like Obama, if anybody, should have done that. And I don't know why he didn't.
Well, because I mean, I think one of the most obvious reasons is that Congress doesn't do anything anymore. Yeah. So the presidents take it upon themselves, in order to get anything done, they have to issue these executive orders, which, you know, just expand their power. So,
Yeah, I mean, and just to throw it out there, but our system of government was designed for 3 million farmers that occupied like a small slice of coastline. And right now we have 330 million people that occupy 9 time zones. We're a global empire larger than Rome ever could have dreamt of being. And we simply don't use the Constitution except as a bit of a like useful legal fiction. It's not anything that in a practical sense works for us right now. So we have the system of representatives where it's like one representative per every 700,000 people or something. It should be like one per every 50,000 people. And if that means that we have 5,000 people in Congress, okay. We have a system that has first past the post voting, which just in pure game theory terms means you're going to get your second greatest evil every time. You're always going to vote for your second greatest evil because there's always a one greater evil. Rather than like a ranked choice voting or some other system, we fight reforms at every single level. And by just the very nature of that, it means that, like Afra was saying earlier, the calculation eventually becomes, well, we'll just win the presidency. We'll do whatever it takes to win the presidency. The rest of the system is broken. We can't really do anything useful anymore in the rest of it, but at least
it's broken. That's the
well, it's broken, but it's still, even with dumb people, you can conceptualize having a leader, a superhero, god, king figure, whatever, who, well, I mean, whoever's president's basically America for like 4 years. So I am the state in just our, McDonald's kind of a society. Any dumb idiot wandering around the streets here can understand that, okay, well, I guess Trump's the guy who's calling the shots right now until the next election. Congress has the power to act, but they're not going to because of the same reasons they haven't acted for the last several decades. Just the way that everything plays out, it's easier for them to not do anything, to push the blame on him, to give him power where they can give him power, and then complain about it when they want to complain about it. But even when Obama left, when Bush left, when Clinton left, when any of these guys leave power, they don't want to give it up because nothing has changed in the rest of the calculation. Congress isn't going to act. The Supreme Court sees a handful of cases a year out of the thousands they're presented with. Everything is basically broken except for a presidency, which is just by virtue of the rest of the system not reforming and not evolving with the times.
Could a president even give his power back? Isn't it up to Congress to take it back rather than them give it up? Like, what would that even look like?
Well, in theory, you could just
roll back executive orders.
Yeah, you could roll back orders. You could present reforms. Have Congress vote on certain proposals and make the case that, hey, I don't need these powers anymore. These War Powers Acts you voted for me back in 2001, the authorization of military force, which we're still operating under now. We used to joke about a wartime president having more authority, but we've been effectively at war for decades now under different pretexts. Okay. So, and that's just because Congress would rather not deal with the blame and let the presidency deal with it. So all of this continuous push has just created this sense of, well, don't worry about the rest of the government. The president's the guy, and just whoever wins that, you win for 4 years, and you get to be Superman. You get to do whatever you want, and then we're increasingly going down that route where every election is the end of history because, in theory, that next guy who gets in, that next gal who gets in, Chairman AOC is going to come in and send everyone to the gulag, and AOC herself probably isn't going to do that. But there is some leftist in the wings that you haven't heard of right now who will. And like nobody thought of Trump 10 years ago. Nobody thought of who the leftist Trump in 10 years is going to be. You haven't heard of her, but she's out there. And at some point, the political wind's going to change. And you've created this presidency that is so powerful that all she needs to do is get her hands on it. And all these institutions that you didn't believe in anymore and that you let Trump undermine because it was convenient for me and you got to own the libs and laugh about it, they won't be there to defend you because you didn't back them when it mattered. So when it really, really matters in 10 years, you're going to be more fucked than you can imagine. And that day is coming. I mean, Trump's incompetent. No matter what, no matter how bad he could be, he isn't because he's a fucking moron. But somebody in the wings is not.
But you called him a genius. I just want to
he's a marketing genius. Absolutely. He's a marketing genius.
Only marketing.
But no, and that's legit. Yeah, but there are people out there, even if, again, to go back to my boy, Chairman Mao, he was a very atypical product of Chinese culture, But people like that in a large enough sample size are out there. And if they can get their hands on power and there's nothing stopping them, you know, our system was designed to stop people. And like what Chuck was saying, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. When you believe in the system more than you believe in people, the system will stop atrocity. When you give that up because you want your guy to be in charge, what you open up is the possibility that somebody else gets in, but they're not incompetent. You will wind up with a competent tyrant who isn't going to play games, and they're not going to be stopped by their own ego or their own stupidity. They're actually going to tear the whole thing apart and remake it. And that's what we've opened ourselves up to.
I've been beating this drum for 4 years, ever since the first lock her up chant. And I've said to people, you love this now, but when you're on the other side of it and it's not your person, it's my person or something like that, you're gonna hate it. Why do that? Right? I mean, it's terrifying to me, the idea that how many people will just fall in line for this kind of thing.
So
the thing is, we've never been down this road before in American culture, and people that don't read history don't understand how bad this could get because normalcy bias. It hasn't happened here before, ergo it will never happen. And that's not how reality or physics or life or anything works, but it certainly is how American politics works. And we think, you know what? Our guy can do it now, so fuck you.
So maybe that's the greatest consequence of Trump, isn't that he's become an authoritarian because he's incompetent, but that he's destroyed all these norms,
right,
and delegitimized all these institutions and made them vulnerable.
What do we call it? What do we call it? Is it the Overton window?
Yes.
Where we look at what's acceptable behavior now, and boy, it has undergone a drastic transformation in just 4 years. And after the people you were talking about who in early 2017 were very happy about Trump's early actions, just 8 months before that, they would have bitched if the president had done the exact same thing. So it's amazing the short memory that people can have when it comes to having your boy call them the shots. And one of the underpinnings of my philosophy is never give the government any authority that you would not want your worst enemy to have, because eventually your worst enemy is going to be calling the shots at some point. It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but at some point, someone you fucking despise is going to be in the White House. I promise you. And if you can right now keep a governor switch on the executive branch, you will be praising yourself when that asshole inevitably does get elected. And it will happen, no matter if, Trump's your asshole, Obama, or whatever. The wiser course of action is to make damn sure that when your worst enemy moves into Pennsylvania Avenue, that he's got as few arrows in his quiver as possible.
Yeah, I'm living that right now because Trump's basically my worst enemy. I can't imagine.
Me too. I think we've all become libertarians.
Well, I've hated this guy personally, on a personal level, for 30 years. Okay, so I win. I win this one.
Yeah, that's probably true. So we're going to start wrapping it up. Sorry, Chuck. I know you've only been here for like 25 minutes, but we got to get going. Do you guys want to talk about any current events? We didn't get to do that at the beginning of the episode. I wanted to wait for Chuck to give him an opportunity if he had anything to talk about.
I cede my time to Chuck.
Why, you have no topic?
Well, let Chuck go first.
Okay, Chuck.
Oh God. Okay.
Spotlight is on you.
Talk about tyranny, but no. The deeper we get into this presidential campaign, it's obvious it's going to be a campaign like no other, given the pandemic restrictions we're all under right now. And it's going to be interesting to see how the respective presidential candidates connect with voters. Again, for an incumbent, you know what you're getting. And with Trump, God knows you know what you're getting. So it's not an issue of Trump necessarily having to communicate directly with voters. We know what he's all about. Biden, of course, is not an unknown commodity either, but people want to know if it's going to be, sweet Uncle Joe who is in the White House, or is it going to be the Joe Biden that has recently adopted some more of the further left policies? But communicating with people during a pandemic and with all of the restrictions that we're naturally under, it's going to be interesting to see who does that better. it's just going to be I mean, right now the Democratic convention is on, but it's, you know, it's not really a convention. The convention is you sweating on the floor, delegates getting into fist fights and shit. I mean, that's a convention where somebody could get their teeth knocked out. That's a damn political convention, not, you know, on Zoom with multiple windows. But yeah, it's just going to be different this year. And like I said, I'm fucked anyway. Someone I hate is going to win. So there's not much.
How can you hate Joe Biden? I don't get it.
It's not just Joe Biden. No, I mean, I wrote an article on Joe a few years ago. The team I coach, he showed up at our practice one day in 2012 when he was running for re-election as vice president, and he was cool as hell. I mean, he came out and talked with the guys about playing football in Delaware. He was just in his element. You could see in his body language that he was just 100% relaxed, being on a football field with a bunch of guys, you know, sweating and carrying the football around. He was 100% at ease, and he was the coolest guy to talk to in the world. So, yeah, personally, I got nothing at all against Biden. Yeah.
All right, Art. Art, your sound is off, bro.
Yeah, as far as current events, I had my thing muted. Apparently, there's a Democratic convention underway. People are talking.
Right now.
Has anyone listened to a minute of it?
No.
Okay.
Well, Cuomo just got done speaking, so.
Oh yeah. I don't listen to him. I just mute it and watch.
Shut up.
I'm just kidding.
No, but as far
Michelle Obama, that's all I want to hear.
yeah, I mean, there's a gentleman out there who's been talking about UBI that I would actually be interested to listen to for his 2 minutes. The DNC is letting him talk, but I guess we got John Kasich talking for an hour and 45 minutes, so we've always got that. Because Lord knows, you know, that's my version of hell. Be trapped in a room listening to John Kasich talk.
Nobody likes John Kasich.
No, it's funny. Not even Republicans like him.
No, they hate him now.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, even back then, he got like 2% in the primary. Like, he's actually something of an asshole, and not politically, but just as interpersonally. Like, nobody likes the guy in general because he's just a pompous douchebag. And I guess that's okay for Ohio because God knows what they're doing in Ohio. I guess that works for them. But nowhere else does that fly at all. So, yeah, no, I mean, we've got that going on. But this is going to be an interesting election because the Democrats bet on going without any kind of policy angle. Like Trump, whether you like him or not, he's like, hey, I don't like Mexicans. Let's build a wall. I don't like China. Let's stop this. Like, there is very clear positions, whether or not you like them or don't like them, where they're lightning rods, where he's not afraid of controversy. And he's saying, hey, I at least have a plan. I'm going to do this, and this is how it's going to be. Whereas Biden is the rejection of that. It's don't do anything that's going to offend anybody. Don't say anything. Don't leave your basement. Just lay low. You won the primary doing nothing. Maybe we can win the election doing nothing. And there's a logic to it. The idea that Trump is going to just destroy himself if you leave him unattended.
It seems to be working.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think it's going to work, but God help the country if it doesn't, because what lessons is the Democratic Party going to take from an election where they can't beat Trump with two centrists? You know, I mean, what do you derive from that? Now, for me, I would say, well, the obvious lesson there would be that you tried to beat something with nothing. And while you might not like what Trump something is, even a dumb plan is a plan. And, you know, it's an old Army saying is that, you know, even a dumb plan is better than no plan. And Trump has a dumb plan. Biden's not really showing he's got a plan. And that's the only thing about his approach that really does kind of scare me, is that dumb people, of which America is comprised of at least 50%, do like to feel like whoever's in charge at least has an idea of, hey, we're going that way. Even if it's a dumb way.
A plan, I mean, it can be considered a plan to allow Trump to just kind of shoot himself in the foot repeatedly.
I mean, no, I mean, a plan for like, what are we doing? Like, that's a plan to win an election, but that's not a plan for the country. Like, what's the plan for the country? And for Biden, you know, there's some policy ideas where, like, if you ask him policy questions, he'll give you policy answers, but you don't really get the sense of like, hey, I'm running for this. Like, like for Mitt Romney, why is Mitt Romney running? Well, Mitt Romney is like king capitalism. Like, you know what he wants to do. Like, you know, you can imagine unattended, he's going to have nothing but ideas of how to turn
I
America
mean,
into bank capital. So whereas with Biden, like really, Biden's just a technocrat. Like he was just going to look at policy and do things, but you don't really get the sense
that's what Democrats always are, and they always have a plan, but the plan doesn't fit on a bumper sticker, and people fall asleep in the midst of listening to it. So this is a brand new thing. Let's just go at it.
Hope and change. Remember Hope and Change?
I know, but he also had detailed policy plans that people would fall asleep listening.
That's what I'm saying is he had both, and Biden doesn't have both.
He has Build Back Better. He stole it from Cuomo.
Anyway, that's my sense on it. Is I'm concerned that while Biden's strategy is good, I fear for the tactics because the American populace
he's presenting himself as the anti-Trump, and I think that he's doing a relatively good job of it.
He's doing amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's doing amazing at not doing anything. So to the extent that works, it's great.
I don't know
at
if he's
some
not
point you've got to go a little bit deeper than that. I mean, the whole angle of vote for me because I'm not Trump, that's going to get you some votes, certainly. But what you're going to do in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin,
vote for me, I will bring back normalcy to the United States, to the presidency. I'm not going to.
Okay, but what does normalcy do for my bank account? Like, Trump is talking about, I'm going to bring back jobs because I'm going to build a wall with Mexico, and those guys coming over here to take your jobs.
Ideas. I mean, it's not like he doesn't have any policy ideas.
Okay, but think about it like you're stupid. And I mean that, with love, but like, you're talking about policy. I'm not talking about policy. I'm talking about vision, like something that dumb people can grasp, because that stuff works. And what you're talking about, you get what he's talking about.
You think he needs to be better at branding, and that's a fair point.
Okay, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Afra, what if anything do you have to talk about current events?
Well, no current events, because I've been doing nothing but thinking about Shakespeare for the last 2 weeks. But I do think that Article 2 should be part of this conversation, and the theories of the unitary power of the executive, but that's probably pretty boring to go out on. So I'm just going to say, let's go watch the convention.
Let's go watch the convention. All right. Okay, guys. It's been real. I'll talk to you later.
Peace.
Take care.
Adios.